Welcome to a new era of leadership, today's session of the Rutgers Business School Signature Leadership Series. Today's webinar is offered in valued partnership with Tech United NJ. Previously known as the Tech Council of New Jersey, Tech United NJ empowers innovators, entrepreneurs, and instigators, and we thank them for their support. The Rutgers Business School Signature Leadership Series is a relatively new learning opportunity that brings our audience lessons of resilience, resourcefulness, responsibility, and reinvention through conversations with thought leaders and business leaders from across industry spectrums. I'd like to start by telling you a little bit about our presenter before handing things off to today's moderator. So Bonita Stewart is the Vice President of Global Partnerships at Google, where she oversees the largest U.S. publishers across media and entertainment, news and publishing, mobile apps, search, and commerce. Her impressive career spans 3 decades. Bonita is known for leading multi-billion-dollar operations, accelerating digital technology adoption, and driving business transformation for several major corporations. She was even named a woman to watch in tech. Bonita pioneered the concept for Howard West, a computer science immersion program for historically Black colleges and universities powered by Google. Bonita serves on the board of directors for Deckers, PagerDuty, and the New York Women's Forum. And Bonita received her BA with honors from Howard University and her MBA from Harvard Business School. And we're so glad Bonita is able to join us. And now it is my pleasure to introduce our moderator. Jackie Adams launched a second career as a communications strategist after more than 2 decades as a CBS News correspondent covering politics and the White House. She was a prolific contributor to the CBS Evening News and CBS News Sunday morning shows. Jackie won a News and Documentary Emmy Award for one of her 48 Hours broadcasts. A Harvard Business School alumna, Jackie serves on the board of directors of the Harvard Business School Club of New York and is a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. She is also a member of the Advisory Council of the Milken Center for Advancing the American Dream. A music aficionado, Jackie is currently studying classical composers at the Juilliard School of Music's Evening Division. Jackie, I'm going to hand things over to you so you can take it from here. Thank you both so much.
Thank you for that so kind introduction, Margaret. And as a former broadcast journalist, I really appreciate voices. You should be on NPR. You're wasting your talents here, perhaps. Anyway, my co-author Bonita Stewart and I are just delighted to join you and Ladan Afrasiabi, your Director for Corporate Solutions for the Rutgers Business School Exec Ed program, as well as all of your colleagues and students. We've reviewed the list of past speakers whom you've hosted, and we are indeed honored to be included in your discussion of a new era of leadership. Bonita and I plan to share data from our book, A Blessing, Women of Color Teaming Up to Lead, Empower, and Thrive, as well as from our proprietary research. We're going to provide you with strong evidence to prove the increasingly important role that women, and especially women of color, play currently in driving economic growth in the US and all around the world. We're also going to provide you with our framework for increasing the effectiveness of what we call inclusive leaders. We're going to talk for about 40 minutes and then take your audience's questions for the balance of our hour together. And as Margaret told you, you can begin inserting your questions now into the Q&A box at the bottom of the Zoom screen.
I am equally delighted to be with the Rutgers business community today. Your dean lays 4 R's: resourcefulness, responsibility, resilience, reinvention dovetail perfectly with our framework for leadership, particularly the notion of reinvention for the digital age.
Well, Bonita, let's get started and let's take some of the more obvious questions first. How did you and I come together to write our book? And what does the title, A Blessing, mean for both women of color and leaders everywhere?
Well, it was early on, several years ago. I came up with the idea for teaming up as a vision to change the narrative for women of color, to actually create a substantive and scalable rallying cry for harnessing and accelerating talent. Jackie and I call this SaaS. For some of you, may think software as a service. We see this as sisters as a service. How could we help each other at scale? At the same time, it was an opportunity to provide a roadmap toward inclusive leadership. It was natural to team up with Jackie to create this vision, given her career. As Margaret mentioned, she's an Emmy Award-winning former CBS news correspondent. So we created our own media tech collab. As Harvard Business School alums, we also brought together 8 contributors, and these were insightful African-American women of various generations who work in a variety of industries. They are also fellow Harvard Business School alums whose lived experiences and wisdom help amplify our themes. We were honored to have former BET CEO Deborah Lee write our preface, and former American Express CEO Ken Chenault wrote our foreword. Our book's title does require a bit of explanation. Jackie and I have both been first. I was the first Black woman VP at Google, and Jackie was the first Black woman whom CBS assigned permanently to cover the White House. As first, we have often been considered unicorns, these rare and valuable beings. But like a flock of geese or a majestic parade of giraffe, a group of unicorns is called a blessing, and so we are. Our book is not a memoir. It is mission-driven, a legacy project. We are optimistic in our narrative, and we've crafted several theses, all grounded in data and illuminated by these anecdotal examples from our other unicorns. The other unique component of the book, and which we'll speak more about, is our proprietary research. Our Women of Color in Business Cross-Generational Survey, launched in 2019. As MBAs, we felt metrics matter, and so we collaborated on the survey with a friend of Jackie's, Scott Siff, who founded a highly regarded research and branding firm, Quadrant Strategies. And we do believe this is the first time women in business have been examined in this way, and it is a unique example of FUBU, for us, by us. And this survey, as I mentioned, from 2019, we asked 91 questions of 4,005 American female desk workers across 4 races. That's Black, Latinx, Asian, and white, and very illuminating, across 4 generations, boomers, Gen X, millennials, as well as Gen Z. And from our research, we also designed Chapter 5, which is Dreaming of Allies, to speak directly to managers and leaders who can make a difference.
Well, Bonita, the research was fascinating. So why don't you share some of the most surprising and interesting conclusions from the survey?
Absolutely. We looked at a number of data sources. Actually, we were really digging into the data, but we didn't see an analysis of women desk workers across 4 generations, as well as across the 4 major races. And a major theme that emerged from our proprietary research is what we call generational diversity. We've coined this phrase to highlight the nuances that are being overlooked in today's diversity and inclusion conversations, and to acknowledge the complexity it will add to the overall workplace. It also fits well into Rutgers' pillar of being resourceful. Building a high-performing team requires tapping into everyone. No one should be sitting on the sidelines. And in our Women of Color in Business Cross-Generational Survey, we found that Black and Latinx women, especially our younger Gen Z and millennials, they're more innovative and more likely to be the first adopters of new technology. In fact, our respondents said that their work contributes to the social good to a far greater degree than white or Asian women did. Overall, these women are confident that they will control their careers and can find new jobs easily if or when they want them. Demographics in the US are changing. By 2027, people of color ages 18 to 29, and that's Gen Z and millennials, will be in the majority. And that's according to the census. And so this will be a significant tipping point, which will shape the future of the US as well as our global economy. Now, as business professionals that are in the audience, we all know the most important investment you will make are the people within your companies. From our research, we found these Gen Z and millennial workers are mission-driven, innovative, confident, and they're demanding a workplace that provides the belonging they need to thrive. And thus, there's this dawning of a new era of leadership. These insights are critical to companies developing talent strategies to retain workers of color who have historically been challenging to source.
Well, I am always impressed by our young people, and especially by the implications of these generational differences. But the research also captured a downside to being a unicorn, and it leads us to our first question for the audience today. Margaret, do you want to call up the first question? It's multiple choice. Will you tell us how often you are the only person of your race or gender in a professional setting? And your choices are always, frequently, sometimes, or never, I think.
We have a lot of participation. The numbers are moving all over the map. Let's give a few more seconds and then I'll end that poll and post the results.
Great.
Thanks to everybody who participated. I'm going to post the results that we have thus far.
Okay, so always and frequently add up to, as I see it, 57%. That's the majority of the people in this group today. Bonita, why is this finding so important?
Well, the KPI, our key performance indicator driving much of our work, is our finding about the only. 47% of Black women, almost half, told us that they are frequently or always the only person of their race in professional situations. For Latinx women in our survey, the number was 41%. For Asian, it's 39%. By contrast, 73% of white women are rarely the only person of their race in such a setting. We've also quantified the stress. Black women are almost twice as likely as whites to say that their job applications are viewed skeptically. And even after they secure the jobs, they say that their work is viewed skeptically twice as often. A number of surveys have found that women of color face more microaggressions where their credentials are questioned, and even senior leaders are often asked to perform support staff roles. But most of all, for society, employers, and colleagues, the costs of the only are truly profound. The bottom line is when we create a workplace of belonging that these young people are demanding, only should disappear as talent multiplies. Otherwise, companies are missing out and they could find higher degrees of churn.
I just want to add, Bonita, that this morning I noticed a couple of new studies, and for those of you who want to visit our website, www.leadempowerthrive.com. Those are the last words of the full title of the book. We have a button under the authors section called What We're Reading. And there was a new study in Harvard Business Review this morning that addresses how much and why companies excel when women are in the C-suite. But the key finding was that these companies only do well when they have multiple women in key decision-making roles. And that supports one of our findings, which is that you should hire us and hire us in multiples. And given how much higher the always and frequently was with the group that's with us today, this information should be particularly important for you. So Bonita, talk to us a little bit more about our findings and the new Harvard Business Review reporting. What does it mean for companies and leaders? How can they make this data actionable?
Yes, from our research, Jackie and I have a major premise, which we call the talent convergence theory. This theory expands traditional diversity and inclusion thinking to include the complexity of generational diversity. As such, we see the dawning of a new era of leadership that encompasses IQ. Remember, we moved to EQ, emotional intelligence, and now CQ, cultural intelligence. And this creates this new blue ocean opportunity for companies that are eager to activate diversity as a competitive advantage. And yes, we know there are deficits for women of color, and this we see it at the C-suite, VC funding, the boardroom, as well as management ranks. But if you actually compare those deficits against the burgeoning assets that are fueled by education trends and entrepreneurship, as well as consumer spending, we see in the middle of these this Venn diagram a green field of potential untapped talent. In fact, when Goldman Sachs announced, and this was a few weeks ago, their $10 billion, it was centered on the advancement of Black women. And I said they nailed the talent convergence theory because these were the facts that we explored, and that's why they made the investment. They saw, one, on the educational attainment, that Black women are the most educated section of the US population, and that's according to the US Census. Black women are 3 times more likely to aspire to a position of power with a prestigious title than white women, and that's according to the Harvard Business Review research. Secondly, there's an embrace of entrepreneurship among women of color. American Express studies have said that there's been this explosion, in this era. And from 2007 to 2018, there was a 164% spike in businesses that were founded by Black women, representing $422 billion in revenue in 2019. And that's even though we've received less than 1% of venture funding. 3, Black women control 1.5 trillion in purchasing power this year, and that's according to Nielsen. But this number is larger than the GDP of Australia. And with the societal and the governance pressures, changing demographics, and this unshackled ambition, imagine the ROI for companies who approach this talent pool with a business model that creates a sense of belonging and well-being for underrepresented talent. Managers are at the center of this theory's success. It was eye-opening to see that across the board within our research, and this was for Gen Z, 92% of Black women, 93% Latinx, 96% Asian, 95% white said that they feel that guidance from managers and supervisors will be helpful to their making progress at work. And as we have said, these younger workers are about to sweep into the workforce. And that's why our generational diversity theme is so critical. We will need both inclusive leaders and deeper allyship across the races, genders, and generations to not only find and hire these younger workers, but to actually retain them.
So, Bonita, let's stop for a minute and examine this term cultural intelligence, or CQ, and its importance for leaders. No surprise, if you ask Google, you will find that the term is used in business and academic contexts and can be defined as a person's capacity to adapt as she or he interacts with others from different cultural reasons. And the term has behavioral, motivational, and metacognitive aspects. Now, you lead a very large and successful team, Bonita. How has GQ, or cultural intelligence, impacted your own personal leadership journey?
Yes, at Google, we released our research in 2015, confirming the #1 factor for high-performing teams in the workplace is psychological safety. Adam Grant, he's an organizational psychologist from Wharton, and he's also a best-selling author. His book, Think Again, is terrific if you want a read. But he really said it best. He said, psychological safety is not relaxing your standards, feeling comfortable, being nice and agreeable, or giving unconditional praise. Psychological safety is a culture of respect, trust, and openness where it's not risky to raise ideas and concerns. And this is where CQ proves valuable. And I've explored it firsthand within my team. In fact, in our annual feedback survey, I received a perfect score of 100 on visible and inclusive leadership. The key word here is visible. And there's another study McKinsey just came out with on psychological safety, and they actually confirmed this powerful leadership trait: consultative leadership and supportive leadership first, then you can challenge. That equals positive team climate. And they've said, and I quote, team leaders are more likely to exhibit supportive, consultative, and challenging leadership if senior leaders demonstrate inclusiveness. For example, by seeking out opinions that might differ from their own and by treating others with respect. Cultural awareness, they said, was in the top category for senior leader inclusiveness. And that, from my experience, this means everyone. Underrepresented minorities, introverts, LGBTQ+, women, white men, everyone needs to feel safe. And that's what I found within my leadership team. I'll give you two quick examples. We trained everyone on how to give productive feedback because I knew, from the research that women and underrepresented minorities actually receive the least amount of feedback. But imagine if, in fact, you could lift all boats and everyone had feedback. A fellow ex-Googler, Kim Scott, has written an excellent book, which is called Radical Candor. And we continue to train on cultural sensitivities. In fact, we've done introvert training, and that was actually conceived and developed, and executed by an introvert. And up next with my team, with everything that's going on in the Asian community for the AAPI, we're actually looking at Asian Americans as well as the Pacific Islanders as part of that.
Fascinating work. Let's ask our audience a next question, Margaret, about cultural intelligence. How important is the notion of cultural intelligence for leaders? And you've got three choices here: very important, neutral, or not very important. Let's take a few seconds to find out how this audience feels.
This one seems a little bit more of a runaway than the other question was.
Well, Bonita sort of teed it up. You'd kind of have to be not paying attention if you.
I think we've given them plenty of time for our audience, and let's see officially see the results.
Well, 94%, you're right, it is a runaway. So Bonita, let's go on to a next question. Given that this group clearly thinks that cultural intelligence is important, can you give us more details about the playbook for inclusive leaders? You and I spent much of our analysis thinking about what leaders can do differently, and here we've got a wonderful laboratory to share those.
Absolutely. It's nice to hear that over 94% of you think that this is important. I can see that there are future leaders as part of the Rutgers business community. So let's get you all out there. So here's the playbook. One, hire brilliant, ambitious women of color, and hire us in multiples. The era of tokenism, of one and done, is over. We talked about the stress, the scrutiny, it's just, if you see an only, you should absolutely eradicate that. And two, become an inclusive leader. Our book can provide you with a playbook. We have an entire chapter called Dreaming of Allies, and we are your allies too. We ask all leaders, especially our white male allies, be courageous. Look for potential rather than perfection. Also look beyond folks who just look like you when searching for talent, and to become comfortable being uncomfortable. If you think about the gym, or I think about ballet, one of my favorite hobbies, your muscles grow and become stronger only when you stretch them, and only when there's a pleasant ache. You need to stretch your leadership, your management muscles, and discomfort shouldn't be viewed as a negative. It should be viewed as lifelong learning and reinvention. And I know this is part of Rutgers' philosophy. Three, allyship can come from any direction. We must all stand up for one another. We've already discussed the need for IQ and EQ. We are urging all to develop CQ skills in terms of in the area of cultural intelligence. And then based on our proprietary research, we are encouraging leaders to focus on generational diversity. It could take you off your game if you don't understand the differences across the generation. We need a greater emphasis, and I can't say this enough, on manager excellence. Everyone deserves a great manager, and great managers can be trained. And if we can create enough psychological safety in the workplace and enough radical empathy, even average managers can learn to become great ones. And that's what everyone within the workplace deserves. And finally, team up. This is our anthem, especially for people of color. It's also an anthem for allies to team up and tap into the available brilliance that's likely hidden in plain sight.
Well, this is sort of the final point in our formal presentation, Bonita. We've mentioned Dean Lay's 4 R's: resourcefulness, responsibility, resilience, and reinvention. But we have our own alliterative construct as well. How do the 4 R's compare with your 4 C's: courage, character, culture, and concentration, qualities that are your own personal North Star?
Yes, Jackie and I, for all of you, hadn't known each other very well when we first began collaborating, but we learned that there were major overlaps in our lives that involve resilience and responsibility and resourcefulness, several of the Dean's R's. Jackie and I were both inspired by our fathers in major ways, and amazingly, though sadly, both of our fathers died at the same young age, just 47, of the same disease, heart disease, while we were both in college. I was a freshman, Jackie was a senior. Neither of our fathers had the opportunity to see the full flowering of our careers. And in some ways, we both feel that we have been achieving for ourselves and for our dads. Our chapter 1 includes the inspiring, patriotic, poetic essay that my father wrote called The Trail to Success. Early in my career, I found this speech as I was sifting through old papers in my grandmother's house after she passed. And with the simplicity and clarity, my father highlighted a personal framework which guides my decision-making and life purpose to this day. He touted the 4 C's: concentration, culture, courage, and character as a way to sort your priorities and actions. So he said, you have to have this, you need to be focused on what you're doing, be aware of everyone. So I think he was an early adopter. We talked about courage as a leader, and then just character. I mean, that's how you show up, every day. And today, these 4 C's have become my leadership principles to hone my, skill building, expand my own cultural intelligence, and also to make tough calls, both personal and professional, and also to be my noblest. And this written treasure map has been my North Star, and I take immense pride in sharing the scalable framework with everyone.
Well, it was such a blessing for Bonita to find her father's speech and to share it with all of us. You can find it at the end of our chapter 1, which is called Our Natural Grit. And in fact, the whole chapter is about the notion of resilience. So thank you, Bonita. Thank you, Margaret. Thank you, the Rutgers Business School community. And it's now time to address your questions. So let's take a look at what you have on your minds. I already see that there are a number of questions. Let me Let's sort of read through them a little bit. Can you see them too, Bonita?
Yes.
The first one is, how did you command authority and influence in your career as women and women of color? If I can answer that quickly, I'm 6 feet tall. So that sort of gives me sort of a form of command right from the get-go. But Bonita?
No, in terms of commanding authority, and I think both Jackie and I have been pioneers, and you just have to own it. Quite frankly, I've worked in mostly male-dominated industries. Being in technology, I also spent time in the automotive. But I do think sometimes when we do show up, many times we are underestimated. So if you are prepared, I would say that is the foundation, the preparation, and always bring data to the equation. And so when you bring data, there's an opportunity for you to become more of an authority and become a go-to person in terms of offering your influence and sharing your influence with others.
The same questioner, my terrible eyesight, Ariha Zia, asked what advice or practices do you believe helped you assume leadership, even in male-dominated sectors? Well, again, I hate to sound like a broken record, but I want to send you to our book. In Chapter 5, Dreaming of Allies, I talk about one of the leaders that I worked with. His name is Brian Healy. I met him on my very first day at CBS, and I had a great career. He told me on that first day, welcome, you're going to have a great career. And 40 years later, I called Brian and I asked him what he had known about me before I appeared on his doorstep, and why he thought I was going to have a great career and why I did. And he said several things that are really instructive, even to young people entering the workforce right now. I didn't know until 40 years later that Brian felt there was a personal connection between us because I had been born and grew up in Boston, and he had grown up in New Bedford, Massachusetts. I didn't even know this geographic connection was a thing. And again, it took me 40 years to learn that we had this connection. But as we sort of intimated, people like hiring people who share something with themselves. And perhaps in the interview process, you might try to suss out what you share, whoever you are, with the person that you are interviewing with. The other thing Brian said was that I knew how to do the job. He didn't have to expend energy and time and resources to be able to get me on the air. He said I was upbeat, I was high energy, I had a sense of humor, and many of the other correspondents were older, sort of grumpy men, and they were all kind of low energy. So be upbeat, be positive, and know how to do the job. And the other thing was, my coworkers, and they were mostly men, the camera crews and the other producers, they had given me a nickname. They did not mean it as a compliment, but I took it as a compliment. They called me Eleanor Roosevelt. And I would have to say that Eleanor Roosevelt is probably one of the least sexually attractive women in the history of the world. But the fact that I had this nickname meant that I was not subject to sexual harassment. You really wouldn't harass Eleanor Roosevelt. But Brian, God bless him, said that he knew about the nickname and he thought that it meant that I was sophisticated and I had a certain presence. So what would the advice be? Act like Eleanor Roosevelt. Bonita?
I just want to build on the comment that I mentioned earlier, because I do think there's one practice that I believed really helped me, to ascend. And that was finding a trusted resource to ask for feedback often. And I went into the automotive industry, from IBM. And so I didn't know the industry, but someone told me, you have really great approach, you have, leadership capability, but you don't know the industry. Why don't you do this? I want you to take on a product line And I took that advice and my humility and said, I know I can do this. Let me get more experience. And I did. And then all of a sudden I was the breakout. I was and was able to lead all of the Dodge minivan and cars. But it was the feedback and the timely feedback that allowed me to actually course correct. So it's great to have positive feedback, but it's also important to have honest feedback so that you are constantly developing your skills.
There's a great back and forth going on here because we have questions both in the Q&A box and also in the chat box. And I want to start with one that just sort of disappeared. It was from James, and it was optimistic. It was positive. And then there was another question in the chat box about what happens when people sabotage you. That's sort of negative. But Bonita, why don't we start with the positive? What inspires you and challenges you at the same time?
I think what inspires me is well, first of all, being in technology, and I love this McKinsey stat because I think we can apply it to everything. What happened in 2020, they talked about, with the pandemic, the business just accelerated. So e-commerce penetration actually grew 10 years and 3 months. But if you think about everything grew in an accelerated fashion. So I do think what excites me and inspires me the most is we have this opportunity to step up as leaders within the business community. And there's so much that we can do. And it will be enabled in many respects by technology. So I do believe the future is bright, but the future will be different. And I will go back to the Rutgers philosophy because it's one of my personal philosophies. It's the lifelong learning. How are you going to reinvent yourself? And what are the things that you need to know as part of that? And so I'm quite inspired for the future. And the young are just, the brilliance is there. I mean, you look at Dr. Jill Biden, who tapped Amanda Gorman, 22 years old, to do the inaugural poem, as the first. And she did it and she nailed it, and that's the type of brilliance that is just everywhere. So I think we're going to see more of an entrepreneurial bubble, quite frankly. I think creativity will just be overflowing.
One of the other items that I posted this morning, again, on what we're reading, this is a page on our book's website, leadempowerthrive.com, is about Amanda Gorman. I don't know if all of you know, but she is the cover girl for Vogue magazine's May issue. And it's the first time a poet has been on the cover of Vogue magazine. And what makes this especially wonderful from my perspective, and probably Bonita's too, is that this is another wonderful example of teaming up, because the stylist for the photo shoot was a woman of color, a woman with a background in Sierra Leone. And also one of the outfits that Amanda is wearing is a Louis Vuitton blanket that was designed by Virgil Abloh. So there is a sort of wonder, the Black brilliance of teaming up is before us in lots of different ways. LaDon has a question. How did you both do it? What extra steps did you have to take in real life challenges that you overcame? Well, the extra steps are working hard. And I've been on the board of the KIPP charter schools here in New York, and their motto is work hard, be nice. It seems so simple, but it is a recipe for success. Bonita, any other thoughts on this?
I would just say one, and I've done this, I call my career a bit of a zigzag. And so I think you have to be courageous. You have to figure out at points within your career when you need to disrupt yourself. Are you getting too comfortable? It's just, how are you going to continue to challenge yourself? And so I would say, think about your career, but think about when you need to actually disrupt yourself and do something different.
Right. We've got a really interesting question here from Jennifer Aronson. Do you see it, Bonita? She agrees that leadership should be diverse, but sometimes she feels that younger women of color are not respectful to a white leader. And so what can a white leader do to get the trust and acceptance of younger women of color?
Yeah, so actually, Jennifer, I've had people come to me and say, what should I do? They're coming to me as a confidant, how should I think about the situation? And think about all of the data that we just shared with you. This ambition, first to know in technology, the fact that, there's brilliance there. And so I do think that white leaders have to understand what they have when someone, a woman of color. And so you do need to in order to gain the trust, part of it is actually listening to their ideas. I have open office hours. I let people come in, but listening to understand their ideas. And as a leader, you might shape it. It may not quite work, but sometimes you need to just trust a bit, give them a stretch assignment, let them go out and do something, differently. But I think if you actually put a lid on the ambition, that is a problem. And I think that happens all the time. This person is pushing me. They're pushing me and I'm too uncomfortable. So really maybe let the lid off a bit. And in terms of building the trust and the listening, but let them do something. They actually want to do something and do something that's meaningful. And so try to shape that with them. And I think what you'll find is you'll start to build a bit more trust.
And I don't mean to be overly aggressive, but are you creating a barrier yourself? Maybe if you are more accepting, as Bonita said, lift this lid, you might get back what you give. Let's talk to Matthew Solowski, who has several questions here. And he says that there are negative stereotypes that are sometimes driven in the media, but we have a positive message. And how can the establishment media amplify these positive messages? Well, I get this question often about the media. You shouldn't be a passive consumer of media. You should be your own editor. And all of these positive messages that Bonita and I are reflecting to you in this hour together, they're all out there. It's sort of stunning when you think about how much good is out there. And again, if you want to find a continuous source of upbeat messaging, go to the What We're Reading page under the authors button on leadempowerthrive.com. But be your own editor. And these positive, upbeat, wonderful stories are everywhere. There's a new mayor of St. Louis, a Black woman for the first time. As I said, the Vogue magazine cover, this wonderful new survey in Harvard Business Review that says that women of color in the C-suites in multiples drive excellence in all aspects of a company's activities, but that has to be in multiples. And there had to have been a woman in power in the beginning before the multiples were added. So that would be my suggestion. Bonita, any other thoughts?
No, Jackie, I mean, I think you covered the media. The one other thing I would say, since this is a business community, is when there's a message that perhaps could be a negative message, trust me, there are companies that are reading all of the data that we are reading and that we are providing. And so those will be the business leaders that are going to create the inclusive communities, tap into this talent that's available, and also tap into the innovation And think about the 1.5 trillion. So businesses are going to start to see this when they think about revenue inclusion and how this actually could contribute to the bottom line. As we've had this dialogue today, that's what the business community, I think you're going to see a separation of the leaders, and there always will be laggards. But I think the leaders are going to change the messaging.
Just one other story that I posted today. You reminded me. Target, the retail, big box retail outlet, has announced that they are spending several $billions. I want to say $2 billion, but that doesn't seem like quite enough. They're going to increase the number of their vendors of color from about 50 to about 200. Between now and 2025. So isn't that wonderful news? We've got all of this entrepreneurial spirit in a community of Black and Latinx women entrepreneurs, and increasingly there is receptivity, publicly receptivity, for this energy and brilliance. James Mendez, a lot of men in this chat, are asking, who inspires you? What gives you anticipation of hope that equity and opportunity are on the horizon? Bonita?
I would say it's not one person. I would say it's this notion of manager excellence. That's what we have to do. We have to inspire one another as fellow leaders. We have to show the way. So Jackie and I, we hope we have inspired this business community today, so that you will think about, creating this inclusive environment. But I think it's up to us. And in terms of actual inspiration, you'll see sprinkled throughout the book, we have Maya Angelou. But you think about what she's written. And so life doesn't frighten me. We are the miraculous is one of the lines in her poem. Still we rise, and that is the inspiration, is the possibility.
I guess I would also say we dedicate the book to our ancestors, because and somebody had a question with the word victimhood in it. I'm not a victim. I have running through my veins the blood of men and women who were slaves, who survived the journey in the bottom of a ship across the Atlantic Ocean, who survived the horrors of slavery and afterwards Jim Crow. There is so much strength in me and resilience. We kind of have, that's one of your 4 R's, and we kind of have a joke. Black people are used to making a way out of no way. So, after the Civil War, the South, white people thought we'd all go away. Well, surprise, we're here, still here. And the demographic trends are such that we are going to be in the majority nationwide very, very soon. I mean, I live in New York City. We're the majority here already. People of color are the majority in California. Get used to it. And there's so much brilliance, there's so much creativity, there's so much energy, and instead of being afraid of it, you should embrace it, as far as I'm concerned. So in terms of inspiration, it's my ancestors. Let's see, another question. Ariha has one. Looking back to when you were in our shoes as college students, what advice would you give to us and entry-level professionals? Can we remember back that far, Bonita?
Yeah, I do think you have to give yourself some optionality. That's one of the reasons why I decided it was either law school or business school. So it's nice to speak with a fellow business community. But I decided that it was the MBA would be the route, in terms of optionality. And so I think that's what you have to think about is one path, multiple paths, zigzag. And I did have frameworks because I'm pretty analytical in that respect. But I do think you can create your own personal framework. When I decided, from a marketing perspective, I would go after the 4 Ps. So I said, if you were going to be an exemplary marketer, then quite frankly, you should be able to do all the 4 Ps. And so that's what I did. I worked in pricing, which was actually in finance. I worked in product marketing. I, led Chrysler brand advertising. So I had the promotion, then also, for IBM with the PCs and the distribution being placed. And so I would say early on in your careers, think about just the optionality. At the same time, think about your North Star. Because if you want to be a CEO in the C-suite, or you want to be an entrepreneur, I do think, building a strong foundation, but having that level of optionality will always serve you well. And then certainly borrow, and still with pride, as we say, if you want to use the 4 Cs, because they will absolutely help you early on in your career.
When I was a senior in college, I helped organize a conference about the future. And this was 1972, long time ago. And I still retain a message from one of our keynote speakers. He said that Social Security would disappear. Happily, it hasn't. But he said we were never going to be able to afford to retire. And so therefore, we should make sure that our work and our pleasure were one. And that way we would never resent having to work forever. And so that was kind of my shallow North Star to have fun every day, to make sure that my work and my pleasure were one. And every now and then when work and pleasure did not align, I changed the work. And also, I got an MBA, and I chose business school over law school because business school was only 2 years and law school was 3. But I got it as an insurance policy against bosses who didn't appreciate me. And the degree has held its value. Truly, one of the greatest joys of my life is that after 20 plus years in journalism, when I finally showed up as an HBS alum in the alumni community, and that's where I met Bonita for the first time, they didn't go, "Oof, where have you been for 20 years?" They said, "Oh, we're so glad to see you." And they helped me channel my education and my lived experience into a second career of my choosing. And that's the optionality that Bonita is talking about. I would urge all of you to buy as much education as you can possibly afford and invest in yourself. I mean, even if that means going into some debt, because having these career options, literally, but also especially psychologically, knowing that you could leave if you're not happy and keep yourself in the style to which you become accustomed is tremendously gratifying and necessary. We've got about 3 more minutes. Tamara asked, do you ever feel you need to code switch to fit in? Well, sure. Yeah. So what? I mean, making a way out of no way. Bonita?
No, I have nothing else to say. Let's go. We can do a couple more rapid.
Okay.
So let's try to.
A
lot of questions. So.
Do you see any that you want to she's thought about it a lot. Superiors are not being fair, and she doesn't have much control. Maybe you should leave. Do you have any other thoughts, Bonita?
I'm just
and here's the old work-life balance. How do we do it all? Can you talk about having families as a woman in business? You can't do it all. It's a fallacy. You have to choose. I have a section mate who said that women can successfully juggle only 3 balls, and we're typically asked to juggle 7 or 8. So you have to choose. Yeah. And how much did Harvard pave the way? It's a pretty good brand, gotta tell you. But Rutgers is too. Anything else you see that you adore, Bonita?
through here.
Let's see. What's the next step when faced with a wall or a blockade in progress? You find a way around, over, under. You don't give up. It's called resilience.
Just on this entrepreneurship, there's someone who said, Lauren, what advice would you give to someone who is in the process of starting their own business and looking for mentorship in people they don't know personally? This is where there's so many huddles, as they're calling them right now, different groups. And so whether it's professional associations or others, like yourself in the industry, I don't know what business that you're starting, but you absolutely must go into these huddles. Like, find as many little groups as you can, because that's how you're going to actually mentor with others. I see it happening all the time in the Valley. It's just they start to get into groups, and then you learn who someone else is doing, or you learn, how to go to market with a product, how to build your product, if you're doing an app or what have you. And so that is what I would recommend, is that if you just go solo, we're saying don't do that. And maybe that's how we can end this, is what we are saying is to team up, because if you can't go solo. Teaming up is the way to go. And this is really for allies, especially in people of color teaming up. We should be supporting and helping each other, but then also the allies, we can all team up because we'll just have many more great leaders like the Rutgers community out in the world. It's been such a pleasure to be here today.
Exactly. I think it's time that we're at the end. So thank you, LaDawn, and thank you, Margaret, and thank you, Rutgers community. And we're around. You can communicate with us on our website and buy the book, and hopefully you'll learn a lot from our experiences.
Bonita and Jackie, thank you so much. I learned so much more about you and your journeys, and you had such great advice for our audience. It was absolutely amazing. And I know that you wanted to show your gratitude to the audience by providing a discount code to anyone who wanted to purchase the book. So while I make my thank you remarks, I'm just going to leave that up so they can recognize the book with that cover and see the link and the discount code there. While I just mentioned that, let's see, to our students, you need to hold on just a moment more because I will show the QR code that you need to get your real points, but that will appear once the recording ends. And I wanted to remind everyone, our full audience, that the Rutgers Business School Signature Leadership Series takes place on Thursdays at noon Eastern, specifically second Thursdays. So for more information, you can always visit our webpage. It's long, but I always mention it, business.rutgers.edu/alumni/lifelong-learning. Up next month is, and this is one of those names I should have tried pronouncing in advance, Stephen Bandrowsek, I think, President and Chief Operations Officer at Xerox. But we always have an exciting schedule of topics and presenters, and that is from suggestions from our fantastic audience. We appreciate that so much, so we encourage you to keep sharing those ideas. And the survey that asks for that feedback is coming up as soon as the webinar ends. Let's see, what else did I want to mention? A link to the archived recording of this presentation will be shared via social media and emailed to those who registered, and it will also appear on the Business Insights page of our website. So students, stand by. Everyone else, including our fantastic presenter and moderator, thank you so much and enjoy the rest of your day.